Good evening all, and welcome back to Untold Fears. Tonight we are diving into the darkest corners of American small towns with 10 of the most disturbing, true small-town horror stories ever documented. These accounts come directly from census workers, pharmacists, teachers, and ordinary people who stumbled into communities where reality itself seems twisted beyond recognition. From the midnight population, counts that never add up in West Virginia, to the prescription medications for diseases that do not exist in Kansas, each story represents a verified nightmare that defies logical explanation. These are not urban legends or campfire tales, but documented experiences from real Americans who encountered something in these forgotten places that forever changed their understanding of what is possible. The authenticity of these accounts has been cross-referenced through official records, employment databases, and witness testimonies that paint a picture of small-town America where the impossible becomes inevitable. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you questioning the world around you. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when darkness reveals its secrets. Now let us enter the hidden America that exists just off the main highways, where small-town hospitality masks terrors that most people never live to report. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Granville Hollow, West Virginia has a population of 847. But every 10 years, when census workers arrive to do the count, they find exactly 1,200 people. The extra 353, they only appear after midnight. Marcus Webb had been conducting census counts for the federal government for 12 years when he received his assignment for Granville Hollow in March of 2020. The small Appalachian community sat nestled in a valley between two ridges, accessible only by a winding mountain road that seemed to disappear into the mist more often than not. His supervisor had warned him that the area was difficult to navigate and that previous census workers had reported unusual circumstances. But Marcus prided himself on his thoroughness. He had never failed to complete an accurate count, and he was not about to start now. The drive from Charleston took nearly 4 hours, most of it along increasingly narrow roads that cut through dense forest and over creeks that had no names on any map Marcus could find. When he finally reached Granville Hollow, the sun was already beginning to set behind the western ridge, casting long shadows across the valley floor. The town itself was smaller than he had expected, consisting of perhaps 50 houses scattered along both sides of a single main road. A general store with a hand-painted sign served as the apparent center of commerce, and a white clapboard church with a tall steeple stood at the far end of town like a sentinel watching over the community. Marcus parked his government-issued sedan in front of the general store and stepped out, stretching his legs after the long drive. The air was crisp and clean, with the earthy smell of recent rain and decomposing leaves. A few residents moved about their evening routines, closing shop windows and heading home for dinner. They nodded politely when they saw him, but there was something reserved about their acknowledgments, as though they were sizing him up for purposes he could not understand. The proprietor of the general store, a weathered man in his 60s named Henry Caldwell, greeted Marcus with cautious friendliness when he entered to introduce himself. The store was cramped but well-stocked, with shelves lined with canned goods, hunting supplies, and basic necessities. A pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated warmth, and several older men sat around it in mismatched chairs, playing checkers and nursing cups of coffee that had clearly been brewing for hours. "Census man, are you?" Henry asked, wiping his hands on a well-worn apron. "Been expecting you for weeks now. Heard, through the grapevine, that someone would be coming around eventually." Marcus nodded and pulled out his identification. "Marcus Webb, U.S. Census Bureau. I will be conducting the official count for Granville Hollow over the next few days. I understand the population is listed as 847 residents." Henry exchanged a quick glance with the men around the stove, and Marcus caught something he could not quite interpret in that look. "That sounds about right," Henry said carefully. Most folks live up the holler a ways, scattered through the hills. Takes some walking to get to all of them." "I appreciate that," Marcus replied. "I have been doing this for 12 years, so I am used to difficult terrain. Is there a motel or boarding house where I can stay while I conduct the count?" One of the men around the stove, a thin fellow with a gray beard and penetrating blue eyes, spoke up without looking away from the checkerboard. "Widow Morrison rents out a room above the old pharmacy building. Clean beds, decent cooking. Just tell her that Ezra sent you." Marcus thanked them and made his way to the pharmacy building, which turned out to be a narrow 2-story structure wedged between a hardware store and what appeared to be an abandoned barber shop. The pharmacy itself had been closed for years, judging by the dusty windows and faded signs, but a side door led to a staircase that climbed to the second floor. Mrs. Morrison was a pleasant woman in her 70s who seemed delighted to have a visitor. She showed him to a small but comfortable room with a view of the main street and the church beyond. "You will find the folks here friendly enough," she said as she handed him a key. "Just remember that we keep early hours. Most everyone is in bed by 9 o'clock, especially this time of year." Marcus spent his first evening reviewing his maps and planning his route through the community. According to his files, Granville Hollow had been established in the 1880s as a logging town, though the timber industry had long since moved on. The population had remained relatively stable for decades, hovering between 800 and 900 residents according to previous census counts. What struck him as odd was the consistency of that number. Most small rural communities experienced some fluctuation over the decades as young people moved away and older residents passed on, but Granville Hollow seemed to maintain an almost supernatural stability. He began his official count the next morning, working systematically through the houses along the main road before venturing into the network of gravel lanes and dirt paths that led deeper into the hollow. The residents he encountered were cooperative but reserved, answering his questions with precise brevity and offering little in the way of casual conversation. By the end of his first full day, he had counted 127 people living in 43 households, all of whom had been born and raised in the area. The second day took him farther up the hollow, where the houses became increasingly sparse and the terrain more challenging. Many of the residents here were elderly, living alone in cabins that had been in their families for generations. They treated Marcus with the same polite distance he had encountered in town, but he began to notice something else in their manner. When he asked about neighbors or other families living nearby, their directions were always precise and their counts always exact. No one ever said, "I think," or "maybe," or "around 10 people." They always knew exactly how many people lived in each household, and they always knew exactly where to find them. By the evening of his third day, Marcus had counted 847 residents, matching the official population figure exactly. He was satisfied with his work and planned to spend one more day double-checking his numbers before filing his final report. He had dinner at the general store, where Henry Caldwell served him a plate of pot roast and vegetables, while the same group of older men maintained their eternal checker game around the stove. "Finished up your counting?" Henry asked as he refilled Marcus's coffee cup. "Just about," Marcus replied. 847, just like the records show. Very consistent community you have here." Again, he caught that look passing between Henry and the other men. This time, Ezra spoke directly to him. "You might want to take another walk tonight," the old man said, still studying the checkerboard. "Sometimes folks come out in the evening that you might not see during the day." Marcus considered this advice as he walked back to his room above the old pharmacy. It was possible that he had missed some residents who worked night shifts or kept unusual hours. Thoroughness was his professional obligation, and he prided himself on never leaving a stone unturned. After resting for a few hours, he decided to take Ezra's suggestion and conduct an evening count to ensure he had not missed anyone. He set out at 10 o'clock carrying a flashlight and his clipboard, retracing the routes he had taken during his daytime surveys. The night was clear and cold, with a nearly full moon providing adequate visibility along the main road. Most of the houses he had visited during the day showed lights in their windows, and he could see families settling in for the evening. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until he reached the far end of town near the white church. There, along a dirt lane that he was certain he had explored thoroughly during the day, stood a house that he did not remember seeing before. It was a modest two-story home with yellow siding and a wraparound porch, similar in style to many of the other houses in Granville Hollow. Warm light glowed from the windows, and smoke rose from the chimney. A mailbox at the end of the driveway bore the name Patterson. Marcus approached the front door, puzzled by his apparent oversight. He prided himself on his attention to detail, and it seemed impossible that he could have missed an entire household during his systematic survey. When he knocked, the door was answered by a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes. "Good evening," Marcus said, showing his identification. "I am Marcus Webb from the U.S. Census Bureau. I am conducting the official count for Granville Hollow, and I believe I may have missed your household during my daytime survey. Would you mind answering a few questions?" The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret Patterson, seemed entirely unsurprised by his visit. She invited him inside, where he met her husband Robert and their teenage son Daniel. They answered his questions with the same precise courtesy he had encountered throughout the community, providing exact birth dates, occupation information, and length of residence. According to Margaret, they had lived in the house for 15 years, and before that had resided with Robert's parents in a cabin farther up the hollow. As Marcus completed his interview and prepared to leave, Daniel Patterson walked him to the door. The boy appeared to be about 17 with the lean build and weathered hands of someone accustomed to outdoor work. "Mr. Webb," Daniel said quietly, glancing back toward the house to ensure his parents were not listening, "you should probably keep walking tonight. There are more of us out here than you found during the day." Marcus thanked him and continued his evening survey. Over the next 3 hours, he encountered 353 additional residents living in houses that he was absolutely certain he had not seen during his daytime counts. Each household was fully established, with mailboxes, utility connections, and all the normal indicators of permanent residence. The residents he met were cooperative and seemingly normal, though they all shared the same matter-of-fact attitude about his nighttime visit, as though census workers routinely conducted surveys at midnight. By 2 o'clock in the morning, Marcus had documented exactly 1,200 residents of Granville Hollow, bringing his total count to 1,200 people. He returned to his room above the pharmacy, exhausted and deeply confused by what he had experienced. He had been conducting census work for over a decade, and he had never encountered anything like the systematic discrepancy between his daytime and nighttime counts. The next morning, Marcus decided to verify his nighttime findings by revisiting the houses he had surveyed after dark. He began with the Patterson residence, following the same dirt lane he had taken the night before. When he reached the location where the house had stood, he found only an empty lot overgrown with weeds and brambles. The mailbox was gone, the driveway had disappeared, and there was no indication that a structure had ever existed on the site. Increasingly alarmed, Marcus spent the entire day attempting to relocate the 353 additional residents he had counted during his nighttime survey. Every single house had vanished. Every dirt lane and gravel driveway had disappeared. Even his own handwritten notes from the previous evening seemed to confirm interviews with people who, according to all physical evidence, did not exist. That evening, Marcus confronted Henry Caldwell at the general store, spreading his documentation across the counter and demanding an explanation for what he had experienced. Henry studied the papers for a long moment before looking up at Marcus with an expression of weary resignation. "How many years have you been doing this job, son?" 12 years, Marcus replied. and I have never encountered anything like this in my entire career." "And you probably never will again," Henry said. "Granville Hollow is different. Always has been. Some places just are." Ezra looked up from his checker game and addressed Marcus directly for the second time. "The count always comes out the same, does it not? 847 during the day, 353 at night. 1,200 total." Marcus stared at him. "How did you know the exact numbers?" "Because it is always the same," Ezra replied. "Every 10 years, the census man comes, and every 10 years, he counts the same numbers. Day folks and night folks. Both groups live here, just at different times." "That is impossible," Marcus said. "Houses do not disappear and reappear. People do not exist only at night." Henry shrugged. "You have the count. File your report. Put down whatever number makes sense to your government. But do not try to understand it, because understanding it means becoming part of it." Marcus left Granville Hollow the following morning, filing a report that listed the official population as 847 residents. He made no mention of his nighttime survey or the additional 353 people he had encountered after dark. He told himself that exhaustion and stress had caused him to hallucinate or become confused, though he knew that explanation did not account for the physical evidence he had documented. 3 months later, Marcus received a letter forwarded through the Census Bureau from Daniel Patterson in Granville Hollow. The letter contained no return address and consisted of a single sentence written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for not reporting all of us." Marcus filed the letter away and never spoke of his experience in Granville Hollow to anyone. But every 10 years, when the census data is compiled, he checks the official count for that small West Virginia community. It never changes. 847 residents during the day. 353 additional residents counted only by those brave enough or foolish enough to survey the community after midnight. The population of Granville Hollow, according to official records, remains 847. But Marcus Webb knows the truth. Some communities exist in the spaces between day and night, where the impossible becomes routine, and the supernatural hides behind precise bureaucratic numbers that never change, no matter how many years pass or how many census workers venture into the hollow after dark. When pharmacist Elena Rodriguez moved to Millbrook, Kansas, she noticed something odd about the prescriptions. Every single resident was taking the same medication, and when she looked up what it was for, the condition did not exist. Elena had spent 8 years working at chain pharmacies in Kansas City before the opportunity in Millbrook presented itself. The previous pharmacist, Dr. Harold Kemper, had run the town's only pharmacy for over 30 years before his sudden retirement due to health concerns. The job posting had been surprisingly generous in its compensation package, offering nearly double what Elena earned in the city, plus full relocation assistance and a guaranteed 5-year contract. For a single mother raising 2 teenagers, the financial security was too appealing to ignore. The drive from Kansas City took 3 hours through increasingly rural countryside, past endless fields of wheat and corn stretching to the horizon in every direction. Millbrook itself was typical of small Kansas farming communities, with a population of just over 2,000 residents clustered around a main street lined with brick storefronts that dated back to the early 1900s. The pharmacy occupied a corner building that had clearly been the town's pride at one time, with large windows, decorative stonework, and Kemper Pharmacy, established 1952, painted in gold lettering across the front glass. Elena arrived on a Monday morning in early September, when the late summer heat still shimmered off the pavement, and the corn in the surrounding fields stood tall and golden, ready for harvest. Dr. Kemper met her at the pharmacy to hand over the keys and walk her through the basic operations. He was a thin, nervous man in his 70s with trembling hands and eyes that seemed to avoid direct contact. "Simple operation," he said, as he led her through the cramped aisles lined with over-the-counter medications and medical supplies. Nothing complicated. Most prescriptions come from Dr. Morrison at the medical clinic down the street. He has been treating folks here for 20 years, knows what everyone needs. The pharmacy's computer system was outdated but functional, and the inventory was well organized according to a system that Dr. Kemper had obviously perfected over decades of practice. What struck Elena immediately was the unusual uniformity of the medication stock. Most of the shelf space was devoted to a single prescription medication called cognizine, stored in industrial-sized bottles that suggested massive consumption. "We go through quite a bit of that one," Dr. Kemper explained when he noticed her examining the cognizine inventory. "Most common prescription in town. Dr. Morrison writes it for just about everyone." Elena nodded, though she was not familiar with cognizine from her years of pharmacy experience. She made a mental note to research the medication once she had settled into her new routine. Dr. Kemper completed his walk-through quickly, as though eager to leave, and handed her a thick binder containing customer records and prescription histories. "Everything you need is in there," he said, already moving toward the door. "Dr. Morrison will be by later to introduce himself. Good luck, Miss Rodriguez." Elena spent her first day familiarizing herself with the pharmacy's operations and reviewing customer files. What became immediately apparent was Dr. Kemper's observation about the uniformity of prescriptions. According to the records, approximately 90% of Millbrook's adult population was taking cognizine, usually in identical dosages prescribed by Dr. Morrison. The medication was typically prescribed for something called chronic cognitive resistance syndrome, which Elena had never encountered in her pharmaceutical education or professional experience. When Dr. Morrison visited the pharmacy that afternoon, Elena's first impression was of a competent, professional physician who seemed genuinely concerned about his patient's well-being. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and the confident manner of someone accustomed to being the definitive medical authority in his community. "Dr. Kemper tells me you have extensive experience in clinical pharmacy," he said as he reviewed several prescription orders. "That is excellent. The people of Millbrook have some unique medical needs that require careful attention to detail." Elena seized the opportunity to ask about cognizine. "I notice that medication makes up a large portion of our prescription volume. I am not familiar with chronic cognitive resistance syndrome from my previous experience." Dr. Morrison paused in his review of the prescriptions, studying Elena with an expression she could not quite interpret. "It is a relatively rare condition that seems to occur with unusual frequency in certain rural communities," he said carefully. "The symptoms include difficulty accepting new information, resistance to changes in routine, and what we might call cognitive inflexibility. Left untreated, it can lead to serious social and psychological complications." "I see," Elena replied. "And cognizine is effective in treating these symptoms?" "Remarkably so," Dr. Morrison confirmed. "We have seen excellent results in maintaining community stability and individual well-being. I would be happy to provide you with some clinical literature on the subject." That evening, Elena attempted to research chronic cognitive resistance syndrome and cognizine through medical databases and pharmaceutical references. What she discovered was deeply troubling. Neither the condition nor the medication appeared in any legitimate medical literature. The physician's desk reference contained no entry for cognizine, and searches through medical journals produced no results. Even more concerning, when she attempted to trace the medication's manufacturer through the lot numbers on the pharmacy's inventory, she found no record of the supposed pharmaceutical company. Over the next several days, Elena began paying closer attention to her interactions with Millbrook's residents as they came to fill their prescriptions. What she observed was a community that functioned with an almost mechanical uniformity. Customers arrived at predictable times, requested their medications with identical phrasing, and responded to questions or conversation with remarkably similar expressions and speech patterns. No one complained about side effects, no one asked questions about dosages, and no one expressed any curiosity about their medical treatment. More disturbing was what Elena began to notice about the few residents who were not taking cognizine. These individuals, mostly recent arrivals to the community or temporary workers, behaved differently from the established population. They asked questions, expressed opinions, and demonstrated the kind of individual personality traits that seemed completely absent among the medication-compliant residents. Elena's growing concern reached a critical point when she decided to examine the actual contents of the cognizine tablets. Using the pharmacy's basic testing equipment, she discovered that the medication contained no active pharmaceutical ingredients that have appeared in any reference materials. Instead, the tablets seemed to consist primarily of a complex compound that she could not identify, combined with what appeared to be synthetic proteins and trace amounts of heavy metals. On a Friday evening in late September, Elena confronted Dr. Morrison with her findings when he arrived to review prescription orders for the weekend. "I need to ask you some direct questions about cognizine," she said, locking the pharmacy's front door to ensure privacy. "I cannot find any legitimate medical literature supporting the existence of chronic cognitive resistance syndrome, and my analysis of the medication suggests it contains no recognized pharmaceutical compounds." Dr. Morrison set down his clipboard and studied Elena with an expression of weary resignation. "How much of the medication have you handled since you arrived?" The question struck Elena as odd, but she answered honestly. "I dispense it multiple times daily. Why would that matter?" "Because the compound is absorbed through skin contact," Dr. Morrison replied. "You have been exposed to it for 3 weeks now, though apparently not enough to achieve full therapeutic levels." Elena felt a chill of fear run through her. "What exactly are you telling me?" Dr. Morrison walked to the pharmacy counter and leaned against it, suddenly looking much older than his years. "Millbrook has been part of a controlled social experiment for the past 20 years. The medication you know as cognizine is designed to reduce individual cognitive resistance to group consensus. It makes people more compliant, more accepting of authority, and less likely to question established social structures." "That is impossible," Elena said, though even as she spoke, she realized that it explained everything she had observed about the community's behavior patterns. "Is it?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Look around you. Look at how smoothly this community functions. No crime, no social unrest, no political divisions. Everyone works together, everyone accepts their role, and everyone contributes to the common good. It is what every government dreams of achieving." Elena backed away from the counter, her mind racing. "You are drugging an entire community without their knowledge or consent." "They consented when they chose to live here and accept medical treatment," Dr. Morrison replied, "and the results speak for themselves. This is the most stable, productive, and harmonious community in the state of Kansas." "What happens to people who refuse the medication?" Dr. Morrison's expression darkened. "There have been very few who have tried. Most find that life becomes quite difficult when they cannot integrate with the social structure. They usually choose to relocate." Elena realized with growing horror that her own situation was becoming precarious. "And if I refuse to continue dispensing this medication?" "That would be unfortunate, Doctor," Morrison said quietly. "For you and for the community." Dr. Kemper was beginning to ask similar questions before he retired. His health problems became quite severe once he stopped handling the medication regularly. Elena understood the implicit threat. Her exposure to the compound through routine handling had apparently provided some level of protection, but withdrawing that exposure could result in serious health consequences. More importantly, she was now part of a system that had been operating successfully for decades, and her continued cooperation was not really optional. That night, Elena sat in her small apartment above the pharmacy, staring out at the quiet streets of Millbrook. The community was exactly as Dr. Morrison had described it: peaceful, orderly, and harmonious. Children played safely in the streets, neighbors helped each other with routine tasks, and everyone seemed genuinely content with their lives. There was no violence, no addiction, no social problems that plagued other communities, but there was also no real choice, no individual expression, and no authentic human diversity. The residents of Millbrook had traded their cognitive freedom for social stability, and most of them did not even realize what they had lost. Elena made her decision over the weekend. On Monday morning, she began systematically documenting everything she had learned about the Cognizine program, preparing detailed records that could be used as evidence if the opportunity ever arose to expose the experiment. She continued dispensing the medication, maintaining her cover, while secretly working to understand the full scope of the operation. What she discovered over the following months was that Millbrook was not unique. Similar programs were operating in small communities across several states, all coordinated through a network of government contractors and complicit medical professionals. The goal was to develop techniques for large-scale social control that could eventually be implemented in urban areas during times of civil unrest or political instability. Elena Rodriguez continues to work as the pharmacist in Millbrook, Kansas, dispensing Cognizine to a population that remains blissfully unaware of their chemical dependency. She has learned to handle the medication with gloves and protective equipment, minimizing her own exposure while maintaining the appearance of compliance. Her documentation of the program grows more comprehensive each month, and she waits for the right moment to reveal the truth about America's most successful social experiment. Every prescription she fills represents another day of lost freedom for the residents of Millbrook, but also another piece of evidence in what may someday become the most important whistleblower case in American history. Until then, she remains the keeper of a terrible secret, watching over a community that has chosen chemical peace over cognitive liberty, one prescription at a time. The Whitman family drove 12 hours to Cedar Falls, Oregon, for their daughter's college interview. They arrived on a Tuesday. The problem? Every single person in town insisted it was Saturday, and they had been expected for the school board meeting. Robert Whitman had been planning this trip for months. His daughter Sarah was a high school senior with excellent grades and test scores, and she had received an interview invitation from Cedar Falls College, a small liberal arts institution with a reputation for academic excellence and personalized attention. The college was not well known outside the Pacific Northwest, but Sarah's guidance counselor had spoken highly of their environmental science program, and the financial aid package they had offered made the education surprisingly affordable. The drive from Denver had taken them through some of the most beautiful countryside Robert had ever seen, winding through mountain passes and dense forests before descending into the valleys of western Oregon. Sarah sat in the passenger seat reviewing her interview notes and application materials, while Robert's wife, Margaret, dozed in the back seat after taking the overnight driving shift through Utah and Idaho. They had planned to arrive in Cedar Falls by early afternoon, giving Sarah time to tour the campus and prepare for her interview the following morning. Cedar Falls was smaller than they had expected, tucked into a valley between forested hills and bisected by a creek that gave the town its name. The main street featured a collection of well-maintained buildings that appeared to date from the early 1900s, with the college campus visible on a rise overlooking the downtown area. Everything looked exactly as it had in the promotional materials Sarah had received, from the ivy-covered brick buildings to the mature oak trees lining the campus walkways. Robert parked their rental car in front of the Cedar Falls Inn, a charming bed and breakfast that had been recommended by the college admissions office. The proprietor, a friendly woman in her 50s named Helen Morrison, greeted them warmly at the front desk. "Welcome to Cedar Falls," she said with a genuine smile. "You must be the Whitman family. We have been expecting you." "Thank you," Robert replied. "We have reservations for 2 nights. My daughter has an interview at the college tomorrow." Helen paused in her review of the guest register, looking up at Robert with a slightly puzzled expression. "Tomorrow. But the school board meeting is tonight. Sarah is expected to present her proposal at 7 o'clock. Sarah looked up from her phone, where she had been checking her interview confirmation email. "I think there might be some confusion. My interview is scheduled for Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock with the admissions committee." "Oh my," Helen said, consulting a large calendar on the wall behind the desk. "Today is Saturday, dear. The school board meets every Saturday evening during the academic year. Your interview presentation is this evening." Robert felt a flicker of confusion. He pulled out his own phone to check the date, which clearly displayed Tuesday, October 15th. "I think there might be some mistake. Today is Tuesday." Helen looked at him with the patient expression of someone correcting a minor but persistent error. "No, dear. Today is Saturday, October 19th. I understand the drive from Denver can be disorienting, but I am quite certain about the date." Margaret stirred from her travel fatigue and joined the conversation at the front desk. "We left Denver on Sunday morning," she said. "It is definitely Tuesday afternoon now." Helen's expression shifted to one of gentle concern, as though she were dealing with guests who had suffered some form of travel-related confusion. "Why did not we get you settled in your rooms, and then you can speak with Dr. Patterson at the college? I'm sure he can clarify the schedule for Sarah's presentation tonight." The Whitman family exchanged uncertain glances, but accepted their room keys and carried their luggage upstairs. Their rooms were comfortable and well-appointed, with views of the college campus and the surrounding hills. Once they were alone, Robert immediately called the college admissions office to clarify the confusion about dates and interview schedules. "Cedar Falls College, how may I help you?" The receptionist's voice was cheerful and professional. "This is Robert Whitman. My daughter Sarah has an interview scheduled for tomorrow morning, but there seems to be some confusion about the date. We were told that today is Saturday and that she is expected to make a presentation this evening." "Yes, Mr. Whitman. Sarah's presentation to the school board is scheduled for 7 o'clock tonight. The entire community is looking forward to hearing her proposal for improving environmental sustainability on campus." Robert felt a growing sense of disorientation. "I am sorry, but there must be some mistake. Sarah applied for admission to your environmental science program. She was not asked to prepare any kind of presentation, and she certainly was not told about a school board meeting." "Oh, but that is exactly what her application indicated," the receptionist replied with unshakable certainty. "She specifically requested the opportunity to address the community about environmental initiatives. The school board meeting is the perfect forum for that kind of presentation." "What day of the week is today?" Robert asked directly. "Saturday, of course, October 19th. The school board always meets on Saturday evenings." Robert ended the call and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. According to every electronic device the family possessed, including their phones, laptop, and the car's GPS system, today was Tuesday, October 15th. But everyone in Cedar Falls insisted it was Saturday, October 19th, and they all seemed to have detailed knowledge of commitments and expectations that the Whitman family had never made. Sarah knocked on her parents' door, entering with her laptop open to her email account. "I have been going through all my communications with the college," she said. "There is definitely no mention of any presentation or school board meeting. My interview is supposed to be tomorrow morning with Dr. Peterson from the admissions committee." "Dr. Patterson," Margaret corrected automatically, then stopped. "Wait, who is Dr. Peterson?" Sarah checked her email again. "Dr. Rebecca Peterson, Director of Admissions. She is the one who sent me the interview confirmation and the campus visit information." Margaret pulled out the folder of materials they had brought for the trip. "According to the inn's information, the college administrator is Dr. Patterson, not Peterson." The family spent the next hour reviewing all their documentation and communications regarding Sarah's college visit. The electronic records on Sarah's phone and laptop consistently showed an interview scheduled with Dr. Rebecca Peterson for Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. But the printed materials they had received, including the campus map and local information packet, all referred to Dr. Thomas Patterson and mentioned Saturday evening community events. As the afternoon progressed, the Whitman family ventured into downtown Cedar Falls to explore and perhaps find some clarification about the date confusion. What they discovered was a community that functioned with absolute certainty about the current day being Saturday. The post office displayed Saturday hours. Local businesses were operating on weekend schedules, and residents they encountered spoke naturally about weekend activities and plans. More unsettling was the fact that multiple residents approached them with specific knowledge about Sarah's expected presentation to the school board. A local shopkeeper mentioned looking forward to hearing her ideas about solar energy implementation. A restaurant owner asked whether she would be discussing recycling programs or focusing more on sustainable agriculture. Every person they met seemed to know details about a presentation that Sarah had never prepared and commitments she had never made. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the family found themselves walking toward the high school where the school board meeting was apparently being held. They had not made a conscious decision to attend, but the social pressure and consistent expectations of the entire community had gradually worn down their resistance. Sarah carried a hastily prepared folder of notes about environmental science topics, though she had no clear idea what she was expected to present. The high school gymnasium was filled with residents who greeted the Whitman family like old friends attending a long-anticipated event. The school board members, all of whom seemed to know Sarah personally, despite having never met her before, welcomed her to the podium with warm enthusiasm. "Sarah Whitman," announced the board chairwoman, a distinguished elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. "We are so pleased that you have chosen Cedar Falls for your educational journey. Please share with us your vision for environmental leadership in our community." Sarah found herself walking to the front of the gymnasium, though she could not remember making the decision to do so. The audience looked at her with expectant, supportive faces, as though they had been waiting months for this moment. Her parents sat in the front row, looking as confused as she felt, but somehow unable to object or leave. "I believe," Sarah began, surprising herself by speaking without conscious intention, "that sustainable living requires community cooperation and long-term commitment to environmental stewardship." The words seemed to come from somewhere outside her conscious mind, flowing naturally as though she had rehearsed this presentation many times before. She spoke for 20 minutes about solar energy, organic agriculture, waste reduction, and community gardens, covering topics she had studied but presenting them with a depth and specificity that she did not remember possessing. The audience responded with enthusiasm and appreciation, asking thoughtful questions that Sarah answered with expertise she did not recognize as her own. The school board members took detailed notes and expressed genuine interest in implementing her suggestions as part of the college's environmental program. When the presentation concluded, the community gave Sarah a standing ovation, and multiple residents approached to discuss specific aspects of her proposals. Dr. Patterson, who had apparently been in the audience throughout the meeting, congratulated her on an excellent presentation and confirmed her acceptance into the college's environmental science program. "We will see you Monday morning for orientation," he said, with a warm handshake. "Your dormitory assignment and class schedule are already prepared." Sarah looked at him with growing alarm. "I have not accepted admission yet. I was only here for an interview." Dr. Patterson looked puzzled. "But you just presented your enrollment commitment to the entire school board. Your parents signed the enrollment documents this afternoon." Robert and Margaret exchanged startled glances. They had no memory of signing any documents, but when Dr. Patterson produced the paperwork, Their signatures were clearly visible on official enrollment forms dated Saturday, October 19th. The Whitman family returned to the Cedar Falls Inn in a state of profound confusion and growing panic. According to all their electronic devices, it was still Tuesday evening, but according to everyone in Cedar Falls, Saturday was ending and Sunday would begin at midnight. More critically, they seemed to have committed Sarah to enrolling in a college program she had only intended to explore, and they had no clear memory of making that decision. Margaret discovered that their return airline tickets had been changed to the following weekend, with confirmation emails that she did not remember receiving. Their hotel reservation in Denver had been canceled, with charges for early cancellation that appeared on Robert's credit card statement, despite his certainty that he had never authorized such changes. Over the next several days, which the family experienced as Wednesday through Friday, but which the residents of Cedar Falls consistently identified as Sunday through Tuesday, the Whitmans found themselves increasingly integrated into the community's expectations and schedules. Sarah attended orientation sessions and campus activities that she had not registered for, but which everyone expected her to participate in. Robert and Margaret were enrolled in parent activities and community service projects that they could not remember agreeing to join. Most disturbing was their gradual realization that their own memories and perceptions were becoming less reliable. Electronic evidence of their original plans and timeline began to contradict their lived experience. Phone calls to friends and family back in Denver confirmed that they had been gone for exactly the length of time that Cedar Falls residents claimed, not the shorter period they remembered. By the end of the week, the Whitman family had accepted that Sarah would be enrolling at Cedar Falls College, though none of them could clearly explain how that decision had been made. Their return trip to Denver felt surreal, as though they were leaving a place that had somehow expanded to contain more time than should have been possible. Sarah began her studies at Cedar Falls College the following month. Though she never lost the feeling that she had committed to something she did not fully understand, her parents returned to Denver with memories of a successful college visit and a sense of pride in their daughter's achievement, but also with a lingering uncertainty about what had actually transpired during their time in Cedar Falls. The Whitman family never spoke publicly about their experience in Cedar Falls, though they occasionally discussed among themselves the persistent feeling that they had lost several days somewhere in the valley between the Oregon hills. Sarah completed her degree in environmental science and went on to a successful career in renewable energy, though she always avoided returning to Cedar Falls despite multiple invitations from the college and the community. The town of Cedar Falls continues to welcome prospective students and their families, always with the same warm hospitality and detailed knowledge of commitments that visitors never remember making. Time moves differently there, expanding to accommodate the community's needs and expectations, ensuring that every visitor leaves with exactly the experience they were supposed to have, whether they planned for it or not. After months of unemployment, Derek Thompson finally found work at the only factory in Broken Arrow, Montana. The pay was excellent, the hours were overnight, and there was just one rule: never look outside during your shift. Derek had been out of work for 8 months when the job posting appeared on the Montana Department of Labor website. The description was straightforward: overnight manufacturing technician needed for specialty production facility in Broken Arrow. No experience required, training provided, starting wage of $35 per hour, with full benefits after 90 days. For someone who had been collecting unemployment and burning through his savings since the paper mill in Billings closed down, it seemed too good to be true. The phone interview was conducted by a woman named Patricia Vance, who identified herself as the Human Resources Coordinator. Her questions were standard: availability for overnight shifts, willingness to relocate, ability to follow detailed procedures without supervision. When Derek asked about the nature of the manufacturing operations, Patricia's response was vague but reassuring. "We produce specialized components for government contracts," she explained. Nothing dangerous or complicated, but the work requires attention to detail and strict adherence to security protocols. The overnight shift runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Sunday through Thursday. You would have Friday and Saturday nights off. Derek accepted the position immediately and drove the 6 hours from Billings to Broken Arrow the following week. The town was smaller than he had expected, consisting of perhaps 200 residents clustered around a main street that featured a general store, a diner, and a combination gas station and post office. The Broken Arrow manufacturing facility sat on a hill overlooking the town, a modern single-story building surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Patricia Vance met Derek at the facility's main entrance on his first evening, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of professional attire that seemed out of place in the rural Montana setting. She was a thin woman in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything with clinical precision. "Welcome to Broken Arrow Manufacturing," she said as she led him through a series of security checkpoints. "Before we begin your orientation, I need to review some important safety and security guidelines." The facility's interior was immaculately clean and organized, with white walls, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of sterile atmosphere Derek associated with medical laboratories rather than manufacturing plants. Patricia led him down a long corridor lined with identical doors, each marked with numbers but no other identifying information. "Your workstation is in production room 12, Patricia explained as she stopped at one of the numbered doors. "You will be assembling electronic components according to detailed specifications. The work is repetitive but requires precision. Each shift, you will be expected to complete a minimum of 200 units." She handed Derek a thick manual bound in black plastic. "This contains all the procedures and safety requirements for your position. I need you to read through it completely before beginning work. But there is one rule that supersedes everything else in this manual." Patricia's expression became unusually serious as she fixed Derek with a direct stare. "Under no circumstances are you to look outside during your shift. The production rooms have windows, but they are covered with blackout material for security reasons. Do not remove or adjust these coverings. Do not attempt to see what is happening outside the building between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Derek nodded, though the instruction struck him as oddly specific. "Is there some kind of security concern I should know about?" "The rule exists for your safety and for the security of our operations," Patricia replied without elaboration. "Violation of this rule will result in immediate termination and possible legal consequences. Do you understand?" Derek confirmed his understanding and spent the next hour reviewing the production manual while Patricia completed his paperwork. The assembly procedures were straightforward, involving the connection of various electronic components into modules that would then be packaged and shipped to undisclosed locations. The components themselves were unmarked and unfamiliar, but the assembly process required only basic technical skills and careful attention to detail. Production Room 12 was a windowless space approximately 20 feet square, equipped with a workbench, assembly tools, and storage shelves lined with boxes of electronic components. Despite Patricia's mention of windows, Derek could see no evidence of any openings to the outside. The room felt completely isolated from the external world, with only the soft hum of ventilation systems and fluorescent lights to break the silence. Derek's first shift passed without incident. He completed his quota of assembled units, following the manual's procedures exactly, and found the work surprisingly engaging despite its repetitive nature. At 6 a.m., Patricia returned to inspect his completed units and dismiss him for the day. "Excellent work," she said as she reviewed his production log. "You exceeded the minimum quota and maintained perfect quality standards. I think you will do well here." Derek drove back to his rented room above the general store as the sun rose over the Montana hills, feeling satisfied with his new employment. The pay was as advertised, the work was manageable, and the overnight schedule suited his natural sleep patterns. For the first time in months, he felt optimistic about his financial future. Over the next several weeks, Derek settled into a comfortable routine. He would arrive at the facility each evening at 9:30, spend 30 minutes reviewing the night's production requirements, and work steadily until 6 a.m. The electronic components he assembled varied slightly from night to night, but the basic procedures remained consistent. Patricia checked on him once during each shift, always professional, but increasingly friendly as his performance proved reliable. It was during his 4th week of employment that Derek first noticed the sounds. Around midnight, as he worked at his assembly bench, he became aware of low rumbling noises that seemed to come from outside the building. The sounds were rhythmic and mechanical, like heavy machinery operating in the distance, but they did not correspond to any industrial activity Derek could identify. As the nights passed, the sounds became more distinct and more frequent. Sometimes Derek heard what sounded like large vehicles moving across the facility's parking lot. Other nights, he detected metallic scraping noises and the distant hum of electrical equipment. Most disturbing were the occasional sounds that resembled human voices, though he could never make out specific words or determine whether they were coming from inside or outside the building. Derek's curiosity about these nighttime activities grew stronger each evening, but he remembered Patricia's strict warning about looking outside during his shift. He focused on his assembly work and tried to ignore the sounds, but his concentration was increasingly affected by his growing desire to understand what was happening around the facility at night. The breaking point came during his 6th week of employment, when Derek heard sounds that were unmistakably human screaming. The noise lasted for several minutes, rising and falling in intensity before being abruptly cut off by what sounded like heavy machinery starting up. Derek sat frozen at his workbench, electronic components scattered in front of him, listening to sounds that seemed to indicate someone was in serious distress just outside his workplace. Without conscious decision, Derek stood up and walked to the wall where he remembered Patricia mentioning windows. Running his hands along the smooth surface, he found the edges of what appeared to be large sheets of blackout material that had been carefully secured over window openings. The material was held in place with industrial adhesive and metal clips, but Derek was able to work one corner loose enough to create a small gap. What Derek saw through that gap fundamentally changed his understanding of his employment and his situation in Broken Arrow. The facility's parking lot was filled with military vehicles, including several large trucks and what appeared to be armored personnel carriers. Soldiers in full combat gear moved efficiently between the vehicles, loading and unloading equipment under powerful floodlights. Most disturbing was a group of civilians in restraints being transferred from one of the trucks to a separate building behind the main facility. Derek quickly replaced the blackout material and returned to his workbench, his hands shaking as he tried to process what he had witnessed. The electronic components he had been assembling for weeks suddenly took on a sinister new significance. The unmarked parts, the government contracts, the extreme security measures, and the overnight schedule all suggested that he had become an unwitting participant in some kind of military or intelligence operation. The remainder of Derek's shift passed in a haze of fear and confusion. When Patricia arrived at 6 a.m. to dismiss him, Derek struggled to maintain his normal routine and avoid revealing his discovery. He completed his production log, submitted his assembled units for inspection, and left the facility with the same casual professionalism he had maintained for weeks. But as Derek drove toward town, he noticed a black sedan following him at a discreet distance. When he stopped at the general store to pick up supplies, the sedan parked across the street and remained there until Derek entered his rented room. Through his window, Derek could see 2 men in dark clothing sitting in the sedan, apparently maintaining surveillance on his movements. Over the next several days, Derek found himself under constant observation. The same black sedan followed him whenever he left his room, and he began noticing other individuals who seemed to be monitoring his activities around town. When he attempted to use the internet at the town's library, he discovered that his access to news websites and social media platforms had been blocked. Phone calls to friends and family in Billings went directly to voicemail, with no return calls despite multiple messages. Derek realized that his discovery of the nighttime military activities had not gone unnoticed by the facility's security personnel. He was trapped in Broken Arrow, unable to leave without raising suspicion and unable to communicate with the outside world to report what he had witnessed. His employment contract, which he now read more carefully, contained clauses about security violations and legal consequences that he had not fully understood when he signed it. On his next shift, Patricia Vance confronted Derek directly about his breach of the security protocols. "Mr. Thompson," she said as she entered production room 12 shortly after midnight, "we need to discuss your performance over the past week." Derek continued assembling electronic components, trying to maintain his composure. "I believe my production numbers have been consistently above the minimum requirements." "Your production quality remains excellent," Patricia agreed. "However, we have detected some irregularities in your adherence to security protocols. Specifically, there has been evidence of tampering with window coverings in this room." Derek looked up from his work, meeting Patricia's gaze directly. "I have followed all the procedures outlined in the manual." Patricia smiled, but the expression contained no warmth. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand something very clearly. The work you are doing here serves vital national security interests. The components you assemble are used in operations that protect American lives and defend our country against serious threats. The security measures we maintain, including the prohibition on observing external activities, exist to protect both the mission and the personnel involved." "I understand," Derek replied carefully. "I hope you do," Patricia continued, "because violations of security protocols in this facility are not treated as simple employment infractions. They are treated as potential threats to national security, with consequences that extend far beyond termination of employment." Derek nodded his understanding, though Patricia's implied threat was unmistakably clear. "However," Patricia added, her tone becoming slightly more conciliatory, "we recognize that curiosity is natural, especially for intelligent employees who take pride in their work. We are prepared to offer you additional compensation and benefits in recognition of your valuable contributions to our operations." She handed Derek an envelope containing what appeared to be a revised employment contract. "This agreement includes a significant salary increase, housing allowance, and extended benefits package. In return, you would commit to remaining in your current position for a minimum of 2 years, with strict adherence to all security protocols." Derek accepted the envelope without opening it, understanding that he was being offered a choice between comfortable compliance and unspecified consequences for continued resistance. Derek Thompson continues to work the overnight shift at the Broken Arrow manufacturing facility, assembling electronic components for government contracts under strict security protocols that prohibit him from observing external activities. His salary has increased substantially. His housing has been upgraded to a comfortable apartment provided by the company, and his benefits package includes medical coverage and a retirement plan that would be difficult to find elsewhere in rural Montana. He no longer attempts to look outside during his shifts, having learned that some forms of curiosity carry consequences that extend far beyond simple job termination. The sounds of military vehicles, machinery, and occasional human distress continue each night, but Derek has trained himself to focus exclusively on his assembly work, completing his quotas with mechanical precision while carefully ignoring everything that happens beyond the walls of Production Room 12. The black sedan no longer follows Derek around Broken Arrow, though he remains aware that his movements and communications are monitored by personnel whose authority extends well beyond the boundaries of his employment contract. He has learned to find satisfaction in his work, his financial security, and his contribution to national security operations that he will never fully understand and is never supposed to discuss. Some jobs offer more than just employment. They offer participation in systems that operate according to rules and purposes that individual workers are not meant to comprehend, only to serve with unquestioning diligence and absolute discretion. Real estate agent Patricia Mills thought she had found the perfect listing in Harmony Ridge, Tennessee. Every house was for sale, every price was $1, and every seller had the exact same reason for leaving. The welcome committee made us an offer. Patricia had been working residential real estate in Nashville for 15 years when she first received the inquiry about Harmony Ridge. The caller identified himself as Mayor Franklin Dobbs and explained that the entire community was undergoing what he termed a voluntary relocation initiative. Every homeowner in the town had decided to sell simultaneously, creating an unprecedented opportunity for new residents who appreciated small-town living and close community bonds. "We are looking for the right kind of people," Mayor Dobbs explained during their initial phone conversation. "Individuals and families who value tradition, respect authority, and understand the importance of community participation. The Welcome Committee has very specific criteria for new residents." The financial details were almost too good to believe. Every house in Harmony Ridge was priced at exactly $1, with the condition that new owners would commit to living in the community for a minimum of 5 years and would participate actively in local government and social organizations. Property taxes were minimal, utilities were provided at cost, and the Welcome Committee offered relocation assistance, including moving expenses and job placement services. Patricia drove the 2 hours from Nashville to Harmony Ridge on a crisp October morning, expecting to find an economically depressed rural community desperate to attract new residents. Instead, she discovered one of the most well-maintained and prosperous-looking small towns she had ever encountered. Every house was freshly painted, every lawn was perfectly manicured, and the streets were clean and lined with mature oak trees that created a canopy of golden autumn foliage. Mayor Dobbs met Patricia at the town hall, a stately brick building that dominated the central square. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair, an expensive suit, and the polished demeanor of someone accustomed to civic leadership. His office was decorated with photographs of community events, awards for municipal excellence, and certificates recognizing Harmony Ridge for various achievements in education, public health, and economic development. "Welcome to our community," Mayor Dobbs said as he offered Patricia coffee from a silver service set. "I trust you found us without difficulty." Patricia accepted the coffee and pulled out her notepad to begin documenting the property listings. "The town is beautiful. I have to admit I am curious about why every resident has decided to relocate simultaneously. That is quite unusual in my experience." Mayor Dobbs smiled, but Patricia noticed that the expression seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. "Change is sometimes necessary for growth. Our current residents have received opportunities that require them to relocate, and we see this as a chance to bring in fresh perspectives and new energy." Over the next several hours, Mayor Dobbs guided Patricia through a comprehensive tour of Harmony Ridge. The community consisted of approximately 300 homes ranging from modest bungalows to substantial Victorian houses, all in excellent condition and all displaying "for sale" signs with the same $1 price point. The school was modern and well-equipped. The medical clinic was staffed with qualified professionals, and the business district included everything necessary for comfortable small-town living. What struck Patricia as odd was the behavior of the current residents she encountered during the tour. Without exception, every person they met greeted Mayor Dobbs with what appeared to be genuine respect and affection, but their interactions seemed oddly formal and synchronized. When Patricia asked residents about their reasons for leaving, they all provided nearly identical responses about new opportunities, and the Welcome Committee's generous offer. The Welcome Committee sounds like a very active organization, Patricia observed, as they concluded the tour at the community center. Oh yes, Mayor Dobbs replied. They coordinate all aspects of community life, social events, volunteer activities, conflict resolution, newcomer integration. They ensure that everyone feels welcome and supported. Patricia requested to meet with members of the Welcome Committee, but Mayor Dobbs explained that they were currently in session and could not be disturbed. He provided her with a thick folder of documents, including property descriptions, community bylaws, and what he described as integration guidelines for new residents. That evening, Patricia stayed at Harmony Ridge's small but comfortable inn, run by a friendly couple named the Washingtons, who seemed eager to discuss the community's transition. During dinner, Patricia asked them directly about their decision to sell. The Welcome Committee made us an offer we could not refuse, Mrs. Washington said, with the same practiced phrasing Patricia had heard from other residents. They have arranged for us to relocate to a beautiful community in Florida, where we can enjoy retirement without the responsibilities of running a business. That sounds wonderful, Patricia replied. What kind of offer did they make? Mr. Washington exchanged a quick glance with his wife before responding. They provided us with complete relocation assistance, including a new home, moving expenses, and a generous financial settlement. All we had to do was agree to participate in the community transition. Patricia pressed for more specific details, but the Washingtons became vague and seemed uncomfortable with continued questioning. They excused themselves early, leaving Patricia alone in the inn's dining room, with more questions than answers. The next morning, Patricia attempted to conduct her own investigation of the Harmony Ridge real estate situation. She visited the county courthouse to review property records and discovered that all the homes in the community had been purchased by the same entity over the past 20 years, the Harmony Ridge Community Development Corporation. The HRCDC had systematically acquired every piece of residential and commercial property in the town, always offering prices significantly above market value to encourage quick sales. More concerning was Patricia's discovery that the HRCDC was owned by a holding company registered in Delaware, which in turn was owned by another holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The ultimate ownership of the entity controlling Harmony Ridge was completely obscured by layers of corporate structures designed to prevent identification of the actual decision makers. Patricia also learned that the population of Harmony Ridge had remained remarkably stable over the past 2 decades, despite the constant turnover of residents. According to Census records, approximately 800 people lived in the community at any given time, but the individual identities of those residents changed every few years as families relocated and were replaced by new arrivals. When Patricia returned to Harmony Ridge to continue her property assessment, she found that Mayor Dobbs had arranged for her to meet with several families who were preparing to move. Without exception, each family expressed enthusiasm about their relocation and gratitude toward the Welcome Committee for facilitating their transition to new opportunities. The Martinez family was moving to Arizona, where Mr. Martinez had been offered a position with a solar energy company. The Johnsons were relocating to Vermont, where they would be taking over management of a small organic farm. The Petersons were moving to Oregon to participate in a sustainable forestry project. Every family had been presented with attractive opportunities that perfectly matched their professional skills and personal interests. How did the Welcome Committee know about these opportunities? Patricia asked Mrs. Martinez as they toured the family's beautifully maintained home. They have connections everywhere, Mrs. Martinez replied. They specialize in matching people with situations where they can be most successful and fulfilled. It is really quite remarkable. Patricia requested contact information for some of the families who had already relocated, but Mayor Dobbs explained that the Welcome Committee's policies prohibited sharing personal information about former residents. He assured her that everyone who had participated in the relocation program, had been extremely satisfied with their new situations. As Patricia prepared to leave Harmony Ridge with her property documentation, Mayor Dobbs invited her to attend that evening's welcome committee meeting, where they would be discussing the criteria for selecting new residents. The meeting was held in the community center's largest room, which was filled with approximately 50 adults who seemed to represent a cross-section of the town's population. The welcome committee, Patricia learned, consisted of 7 individuals who served as rotating leaders for different aspects of community management. They were introduced only by their first names and their committee responsibilities. Robert handled financial planning, Susan managed social integration, Michael coordinated professional development, Jennifer oversaw educational services, David managed infrastructure maintenance, Lisa handled conflict resolution, and Catherine coordinated external relations. The meeting proceeded with remarkable efficiency and unanimous agreement on all topics. The committee members presented detailed profiles of potential new residents, including information about their professional qualifications, family structures, financial resources, and what they termed compatibility assessments. Each potential resident had been thoroughly investigated through processes that seemed to extend far beyond normal background checks. During the meeting, Patricia began to understand that the Welcome Committee's role extended far beyond simple community organization. They appeared to control every aspect of life in Harmony Ridge, from job assignments and housing allocation to social relationships and recreational activities. New residents were not simply moving to a small town, they were joining an organization that would manage and direct every aspect of their lives in exchange for security, prosperity, and social harmony. When the meeting concluded, Catherine, the external relations coordinator, approached Patricia with a warm smile and what appeared to be genuine interest in her personal situation. "We have been reviewing your background," Catherine said, "and we believe you would be an excellent addition to our community. Your real estate experience would be valuable, and we have need for someone to coordinate property management services for new residents." Patricia found herself being offered not just the opportunity to sell properties in Harmony Ridge, but to relocate there permanently and take on a position with the Welcome Committee's operations. The offer included a beautiful home, guaranteed income, comprehensive benefits, and what Catherine described as the security of belonging to a community that takes care of its members. "I would need to think about such a major decision," Patricia replied carefully. Catherine nodded understandingly. "Of course, but I should mention that the Welcome Committee's policies require that anyone with detailed knowledge of our operations either join the community or sign very comprehensive confidentiality agreements with significant legal and financial consequences for violations." Patricia realized that her investigation of Harmony Ridge had led her into a situation where she had learned too much to simply walk away. The Welcome Committee was not just a civic organization. It was a sophisticated system for controlling and relocating populations according to criteria and purposes that she was not supposed to understand. Patricia Mills currently serves as the Property Management Coordinator for the Harmony Ridge Community Development Corporation, having accepted the Welcome Committee's offer to relocate to Tennessee and participate in their community integration program. Her real estate license has been transferred to Tennessee, and she specializes in helping new residents transition smoothly into the Harmony Ridge lifestyle. She lives in a beautiful Victorian house on Maple Street, participates actively in community organizations, and has found great satisfaction in her work, facilitating the successful relocation of families from urban areas to small-town environments. Her previous life in Nashville seems distant now, and she rarely thinks about the questions that initially brought her to Harmony Ridge. The Welcome Committee continues to coordinate voluntary relocation programs throughout the Southeast, always seeking the right kind of people who value tradition, respect authority, and understand the importance of community participation. Their success rate in creating stable, harmonious communities is remarkable, and their methods are being studied by municipal planners and social scientists who appreciate the innovative approaches to rural development. Every house in Harmony Ridge remains available for exactly $1, with the simple condition that new owners commit to living according to the community's values and participating fully in the programs that have made the town such a remarkable success story. The Welcome Committee's offer is always generous, and their methods are always effective in helping people find exactly the kind of life they never knew they wanted. Pastor Michael Barnes accepted the position at Saints Rest Methodist Church site unseen. When he arrived for his first potluck dinner, he discovered why the congregation was so eager to hire him. He was the main course. The call to Saints Rest had come at exactly the right moment in Michael's career. After 15 years ministering to urban congregations in Chicago and Detroit, he was feeling burned out from the constant struggles with poverty, addiction, and violence that plagued inner-city communities. When the Pastoral Search Committee from Saints Rest Methodist Church contacted him with an offer that included a substantial salary increase, a beautiful parsonage, and the promise of a devoted congregation hungry for spiritual guidance, it seemed like an answer to his prayers. The phone interview with the search committee chairman, Deacon Walter Fitzgerald, had been encouraging in every respect. Saints Rest was described as a thriving rural community of 1,200 residents, with a church membership of over 400 active families. The previous pastor, Reverend Harold Kempton, had served the congregation faithfully for 30 years before his recent retirement due to health concerns. The community was eager to welcome a new spiritual leader who could bring fresh energy and modern approaches to their traditional Methodist practices. "We are particularly interested in your background in community outreach," Deacon Fitzgerald had explained during their conversation. "Our congregation believes strongly in the importance of fellowship meals and social gatherings that bring the community together. We host a potluck dinner every Sunday evening, and participation is essentially universal among our members." Michael had been impressed by the search committee's thoroughness and their obvious commitment to congregational life. When they offered him the position with a starting date of October 1st, he accepted immediately and began making arrangements to relocate from Detroit to Nebraska. The transition would give him time to prepare for what he hoped would be a long and rewarding ministry in a community that clearly valued pastoral leadership. The drive from Detroit to Saints Rest took 2 days, with an overnight stop in Iowa. As Michael crossed into Nebraska and began following the rural highways toward his new home, he was struck by the vastness of the landscape and the sense of isolation that came with traveling miles between small farming communities. Saints Rest itself was larger than he had expected, with a well-maintained downtown district, several churches of different denominations, and residential neighborhoods that suggested a stable, prosperous population. The Saints Rest Methodist Church was an impressive Gothic revival structure built of red brick and limestone, with a tall spire topped by a cross that could be seen from miles away across the flat Nebraska countryside. The parsonage next door was a spacious 2-story Victorian house with wraparound porches and mature elm trees that provided shade and character. Michael felt immediately at home as he carried his belongings into the house that would be his residence for what he hoped would be many years. Deacon Fitzgerald arrived that afternoon to welcome Michael officially and to review the schedule for his first week of ministry. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 70s, with silver hair and the kind of quiet authority that Michael associated with successful rural businessmen. His wife Martha accompanied him, carrying a casserole dish and wearing the friendly but reserved expression of someone evaluating a newcomer to the community. "Welcome to Saints Rest, Pastor Barnes," Deacon Fitzgerald said as he shook Michael's hand with genuine warmth. "The entire congregation is excited about your arrival. We have planned a special welcome potluck for this Sunday evening, right after regular services. It will be an excellent opportunity for you to meet everyone and begin building the relationships that are so important to effective ministry. Martha Fitzgerald set her casserole dish on the kitchen counter and began unpacking what appeared to be enough food for several meals. "I brought you some essentials to get you started," she said. "Pot roast, green bean casserole, fresh bread, and apple pie. All made from scratch, of course. We believe in taking care of our pastor." Over the next several days, Michael settled into his new routine and began preparing for his first Sunday service. The church secretary, Mrs. Dorothy Hensley, proved to be an invaluable resource for understanding the congregation's traditions and expectations. She had worked for the church for over 20 years and seemed to know every family's history, preferences, and particular needs. Reverend Kempton always emphasized the importance of our Sunday evening potlucks, Mrs. Hensley explained as she helped Michael organize his office. "They are really the heart of our community life. Everyone brings something homemade, and we spend hours together in fellowship and conversation. It is when we really get to know each other as brothers and sisters in Christ." Michael looked forward to the potluck dinner as an opportunity to connect with his new congregation in a relaxed, informal setting. His experience in urban ministries had taught him the value of social gatherings for building the personal relationships that were essential to effective pastoral care. He spent Saturday evening preparing remarks about his vision for the church's future and his gratitude for the warm welcome he had already received. Sunday morning's worship service exceeded Michael's expectations in every way. The church was filled to capacity, with families occupying every pew and several rows of additional chairs set up in the center aisle. The congregation participated enthusiastically in the hymns, prayers, and responsive readings, and they listened attentively to Michael's sermon about new beginnings and the importance of community in Christian life. The atmosphere was warm, reverent, and deeply spiritual in ways that reminded Michael why he had felt called to ministry in the first place. After the service, dozens of congregation members approached Michael to introduce themselves and express their appreciation for his message. Everyone seemed genuinely excited about his arrival and eager to build personal relationships with their new pastor. Several people mentioned looking forward to the evening's potluck dinner, speaking of it with an enthusiasm that suggested it was truly the highlight of their weekly church activities. Michael spent the afternoon preparing his own contribution to the potluck, a large pan of his grandmother's famous cornbread recipe that had always been popular at church gatherings in his previous congregations. As 5 o'clock approached, he made his way to the church's fellowship hall, expecting to find the usual collection of casserole dishes, salads, and desserts that characterized Methodist potluck dinners everywhere. The fellowship hall had been decorated with autumn flowers and candles, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere that reflected the season and the special nature of Michael's welcome dinner. Long tables had been set up around the perimeter of the room, and Michael was pleased to see that they were covered with an impressive array of homemade dishes. The congregation had clearly made a special effort to prepare their finest recipes in honor of his arrival. What struck Michael as unusual, however, was the arrangement of the tables. Instead of the traditional buffet-style setup, the food had been arranged in a circle around a single chair, placed in the center of the room. The chair was decorated with ribbons and flowers, resembling something between a throne and a shrine. Several congregation members were standing around the circle, holding hands and speaking in low, reverent tones. Deacon Fitzgerald approached Michael with a warm smile and guided him toward the decorated chair. "Pastor Barnes, we have prepared something very special for your welcome dinner. Please, take your place of honor so we can begin our traditional blessing." Michael felt slightly uncomfortable with the elaborate setup, but he recognized the importance of respecting congregational traditions and the sincere effort that had gone into preparing the evening. He took his seat in the decorated chair and looked out at the faces of his new congregation, all of whom were watching him with expressions of eager anticipation. "Before we begin our meal," Deacon Fitzgerald announced to the assembled group, "let us join hands and offer a prayer of thanksgiving for the blessing that God has provided to our community in bringing Pastor Barnes to serve among us. The entire congregation joined hands around the circle of food tables, creating an unbroken chain that surrounded Michael in his central position. The prayer that followed was longer and more elaborate than anything Michael had experienced in traditional Methodist worship, with multiple congregation members offering individual petitions and expressions of gratitude that seemed to focus as much on Michael personally as on divine providence. As the prayer concluded, Michael noticed that the expressions on the faces around him had shifted from simple enthusiasm to something that seemed more intense and focused. Mrs. Hensley approached him carrying a large carving knife and a serving platter, smiling with the kind of maternal warmth he had associated with church ladies throughout his career. "Pastor Barnes," she said in a voice that carried clearly throughout the fellowship hall, "we are so grateful that you have come to feed us. Now it is time for you to provide the nourishment that our community needs." Michael started to stand, assuming that he was being invited to offer a blessing over the meal, but several congregation members moved closer to his chair, effectively preventing him from rising. Their hands rested gently but firmly on his shoulders and arms, not threatening but clearly restrictive. "I think there might be some misunderstanding," Michael said, looking around the circle of faces that now seemed less friendly than predatory. "I brought cornbread to share, and I assumed we would all enjoy the dishes that everyone prepared." Deacon Fitzgerald stepped forward, still smiling but with an expression that had hardened into something Michael could not interpret as entirely benevolent. "Pastor Barnes, you misunderstand your role in our community. We called you here not to lead us in worship, but to provide us with the spiritual sustenance that only a true shepherd can offer to his flock." Michael began to understand that the evening's gathering was not proceeding according to normal Methodist traditions, but his mind struggled to process what he was actually experiencing. The congregation continued to surround him in their circle, their hands linked and their expressions fixed on him with an intensity that suggested religious fervor of a type he had never encountered. "The previous pastors understood their calling," Martha Fitzgerald said from her position in the circle. "Reverend Kempton served us faithfully for 30 years, providing spiritual nourishment whenever the community required it. Before him, Pastor Davidson gave 20 years of dedicated service. They understood that shepherding a flock sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice." Michael realized with growing horror that the Saints Rest Methodist congregation was not simply enthusiastic about pastoral leadership. They were describing a pattern of pastoral tenure that ended with something he did not want to understand. The elaborate welcome dinner, the central chair, the carving knife, and the expressions of grateful anticipation all suggested that he had been brought to Saints Rest not as a spiritual leader, but as the guest of honor at a very different kind of feast. "You cannot be serious," Michael said, attempting again to rise from the decorated chair. "This is insane. I am calling the police." The hands on his shoulders tightened slightly, not painfully but with enough pressure to make clear that his movement was being controlled. Deacon Fitzgerald approached with what appeared to be genuine compassion in his expression. "Pastor Barnes, I understand that our traditions may seem unusual to someone from an urban background, but you must understand that rural communities have different needs and different ways of ensuring spiritual health. We have been practicing our form of communion for over a century, and it has sustained us through droughts, economic hardships, and all the challenges that test a community's faith." Michael looked desperately around the circle of congregation members, hoping to find someone who would help him, or at least express doubt about what was apparently about to happen. Instead, he saw faces filled with religious conviction and anticipation, as though they were about to participate in the most sacred ritual of their faith tradition. Mrs. Hensley approached with the carving knife, her expression motherly and reassuring. "Do not be afraid, Pastor Barnes. Your sacrifice will nourish us spiritually and physically for months to come. Every part of you will be blessed and shared among the families of our congregation. You will become part of us in the most literal and meaningful way possible. The realization that the Saints Rest Methodist congregation practiced literal cannibalism as part of their religious observance filled Michael with a terror that paralyzed his ability to think or act rationally. The elaborate welcome, the eager anticipation, and the references to previous pastors who had served faithfully all took on new and horrifying meaning. As Mrs. Hensley raised the carving knife and the congregation began singing a hymn that Michael did not recognize, he understood that his ministry in Saints Rest would indeed involve the ultimate sacrifice, though not in any way that his seminary training had prepared him to understand. The rural community that had seemed like such a perfect opportunity for spiritual renewal was about to provide him with a very different kind of communion than anything practiced in mainstream Methodist tradition. The Saints Rest Methodist Church continues to welcome new pastors with enthusiasm and traditional rural hospitality, always emphasizing the importance of community fellowship and the sacred nature of sharing meals together. Their pastoral search committee maintains active relationships with seminaries throughout the Midwest, and they are known for offering competitive salary packages and beautiful parsonages to ministers seeking rural appointments. The congregation's potluck dinners remain central to their community life, and visitors are always impressed by the warmth of their hospitality and the obvious devotion of their membership. Their communion services are particularly meaningful, with participants describing a sense of spiritual nourishment that goes far beyond traditional Methodist practices. Pastor Michael Barnes served the Saints Rest congregation faithfully, providing exactly the kind of leadership and spiritual sustenance that the community required. His ministry was brief but deeply meaningful, and his contribution to the congregation's spiritual life continues to nourish the faithful members of this devoted rural church. Graduate student Amanda Foster came to Whisperdale, Maine to research local folklore. The librarian was thrilled to help, giving her unlimited access to the restricted section. But every book she opened contained the same story. Hers. Amanda had been struggling with her doctoral dissertation on New England folklore for over 2 years when her advisor, Professor Catherine Marsh, suggested she explore primary sources in small Maine communities that had been overlooked by previous researchers. The suggestion came at exactly the right moment in Amanda's academic career. Her fellowship was running out, her research had reached a dead end, and she was beginning to doubt whether she would ever complete her degree in folklore studies. The reference to Whisperdale had appeared in a footnote of an obscure 1923 ethnographic survey of coastal Maine communities. The author, Dr. Edwin Blackwood, had mentioned visiting the town to investigate reports of unusual oral traditions and persistent local legends, but he had provided no details about what he had discovered there. Several attempts to locate Dr. Blackwood's field notes had been unsuccessful, and Amanda could find no other academic references to Whisperdale in any folklore literature. The drive from Boston to Whisperdale took 4 hours through increasingly rural countryside, past small towns that seemed trapped in earlier decades, and forests that grew thicker and darker as she traveled north. When she finally reached Whisperdale, Amanda was surprised to find a community that appeared to be thriving despite its remote location. The main street featured well-maintained shops, a diner that looked busy even on a Tuesday afternoon, and residents who moved about their daily routines with the unhurried pace of people who were content with their circumstances. The Whisperdale Public Library occupied a stately brick building that had clearly been constructed with civic pride and substantial financial resources. The architecture suggested late Victorian prosperity, with elaborate stonework, tall windows, and a reading room that featured cathedral ceilings and oak furniture that appeared to have been crafted by master woodworkers. For a town of perhaps 800 residents, the library was remarkably impressive and obviously well-maintained. The head librarian, Miss Eleanor Cartwright, greeted Amanda with enthusiasm that seemed genuinely delighted rather than merely polite. She was an elderly woman with silver hair arranged in an old-fashioned bun and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and curiosity behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Dr. Foster," Miss Cartwright said as she shook Amanda's hand warmly, "we have been expecting you for weeks. Professor Marsh wrote to us about your research, and we are absolutely thrilled to have a scholar of your caliber working with our collections." Amanda was impressed by the librarian's obvious education and professional demeanor, which seemed remarkably sophisticated for such a small rural community. Miss Cartwright led her on a comprehensive tour of the library, pointing out special collections, rare books, and archival materials that represented decades of careful acquisition and preservation. "We are particularly proud of our folklore and local history collections," Miss Cartwright explained as they climbed a narrow staircase to the library's second floor. The restricted section contains materials that date back to the town's founding in 1847, including oral histories, personal diaries, and documents that have never been published or made available to outside researchers. The restricted section occupied a large room lined floor to ceiling with books, manuscripts, and filing cabinets that appeared to contain an extraordinary wealth of primary source materials. Amanda felt a surge of excitement as she surveyed the collection, recognizing immediately that she had discovered exactly the kind of untapped resources that could transform her dissertation from a routine academic exercise into genuinely groundbreaking scholarship. "This is incredible," Amanda said as she examined some of the older volumes. "I had no idea that a community this size would have such extensive historical documentation." Miss Cartwright beamed with obvious pride. "Whisperdale has always been a town that values knowledge and preservation of our cultural heritage. We have had remarkable success in encouraging local families to donate personal papers and family histories. As a result, our collection represents one of the most complete records of small-town New England life that you will find anywhere." Over the next several days, Amanda established a productive routine of spending her mornings in the restricted section, reading through historical documents and taking detailed notes for her dissertation research. Miss Cartwright had provided her with a private work table, unlimited access to the collection, and assistance in locating materials that were relevant to her specific research interests. What impressed Amanda most was the extraordinary detail and comprehensive nature of the historical records. She found family genealogies that traced local lineages back multiple generations, personal diaries that provided intimate glimpses into daily life in 19th century rural Maine, and community records that documented everything from town meetings to social events with remarkable precision and completeness. But as Amanda delved deeper into the collection, she began to notice patterns that seemed unusual for typical small-town historical documentation. Many of the personal diaries and family histories contained detailed predictions about future events that had apparently come to pass exactly as described. Community records included references to residents who would arrive in Whisperdale years before they actually appeared, complete with accurate descriptions of their backgrounds, occupations, and personal characteristics. More puzzling were the numerous references Amanda found to her own research project. Multiple documents dating back decades contained mentions of the graduate student who will come from Boston to study our folklore, and the young woman who will discover the truth about Whisperdale stories. Some entries provided specific details about Amanda's academic background, her research methods, and even her physical appearance and personality traits. When Amanda brought these peculiarities to Miss Cartwright's attention, the librarian seemed pleased rather than surprised by the discovery. "Oh yes," Miss Cartwright said with a knowing smile. "Our local histories have always been rather prescient, The people of Whisperdale have had a gift for understanding how their stories connect to larger patterns of meaning and significance. Amanda pressed for more explanation, but Miss Cartwright suggested that she continue reading through the collection, promising that everything would become clearer as she gained a more comprehensive understanding of the community's unique character and traditions. Over the following weeks, Amanda's research took on an increasingly surreal quality as she discovered that virtually every historical document in the Whisperdale collection contained some reference to her presence in the town and her academic work. Personal diaries written by residents in the 1920s described conversations they expected to have with the folklore researcher decades later. Town meeting minutes from the 1950s included budget allocations for library resources that would be needed when the graduate student arrives to study our heritage. Most disturbing was Amanda's discovery of what appeared to be a complete draft of her doctoral dissertation, written in 1978 by someone identified only as AF, and filed among the community's historical documents under the title Predictive Folklore Traditions in Isolated New England Communities, a study of Whisperdale, Maine. The dissertation was identical to the work Amanda had been preparing, including theoretical framework, research methodology, and conclusions that she had not yet formulated in her own mind. When Amanda confronted Miss Cartwright with the pre-existing version of her dissertation, the librarian's response was matter-of-fact and unsurprised. Whisperdale has always existed somewhat outside normal temporal constraints, Miss Cartwright explained calmly. Our residents have learned to live with the understanding that past, present, and future are more fluid concepts than most people realize. Your dissertation already exists because, in some sense, you have already written it, just as in another sense, you are still in the process of discovering what it contains. Amanda felt a growing sense of panic as she realized that her academic research had led her into a community where the normal rules of cause and effect seemed to operate differently than in the outside world. Every book she opened, every document she examined, and every conversation she had with local residents seemed to be following a script that had been written decades before her arrival. "I need to leave," Amanda said, gathering her notes and research materials. "This situation is not normal, and I cannot continue working under these circumstances." Miss Cartwright's expression became sympathetic but firm. "I understand your confusion, Dr. Foster, but you must realize that leaving is not really an option at this point. Your story is already written in our records, and stories in Whisperdale have a way of completing themselves according to their predetermined patterns." Amanda rushed to her car and attempted to drive out of Whisperdale, but she found that every road leading away from the town somehow brought her back to the library parking lot. Her cell phone had no signal, her GPS device showed no roads beyond the town limits, and her car's odometer registered no mileage, regardless of how far she drove along what appeared to be exit routes. Over the next several days, Amanda discovered that she had become a permanent resident of Whisperdale, unable to leave but provided with comfortable accommodations and unlimited access to the library's resources. The townspeople treated her with friendly courtesy, but seemed to regard her presence as inevitable rather than voluntary. Miss Cartwright explained that Whisperdale had been collecting stories for over a century, gathering narrative threads from the larger world and weaving them into a comprehensive record of human experience that existed outside normal temporal limitations. Researchers, writers, and scholars who discovered the town were incorporated into its story collection system, providing their knowledge and expertise to help maintain and expand the community's unique archive of predictive folklore. "You see," Miss Cartwright said as they sat in the library's reading room, surrounded by thousands of volumes containing stories that had not yet happened. "Every story that will ever be told already exists in some form. Our role is simply to collect them, preserve them, and ensure that they are available when the time comes for them to be lived." Amanda Foster currently serves as the assistant librarian for the Whisperdale Public Library's folklore and predictive literature collection, having accepted that her academic career has taken an unexpected but intellectually fascinating direction. Her doctoral dissertation has been completed and filed among the library's archives, though she no longer remembers writing most of it, and cannot explain how she came to understand theoretical concepts that seem to exceed her previous academic training. She spends her days helping to catalog and organize stories that describe events that have not yet occurred, working alongside Miss Cartwright to maintain one of the world's most complete archives of human narrative, possibilities. Her own story continues to unfold according to patterns that were established decades before her birth, and she has learned to find satisfaction in playing her predetermined role in Whisperdale's ongoing project of collecting and preserving the stories that define human experience. The Whisperdale Public Library continues to welcome researchers and scholars who are drawn to investigate its unique collections, always providing unlimited access to materials and ensuring that visiting academics find exactly the resources they need for their work. Every story eventually finds its way into the archive, and every storyteller eventually finds their way to Whisperdale, where past and future merge into an eternal present of narrative possibility. Miss Eleanor Cartwright maintains her position as head librarian, having served in that capacity for longer than anyone in town can remember, though the exact duration of her tenure seems to vary depending on who is asked and when the question is posed. She continues to take great pride in the library's comprehensive collection and in the important work of ensuring that no story is ever truly lost or forgotten. State Trooper James Mitchell pulled over a speeding car just outside Crossroads, Texas. The driver's license was valid, the registration current, but according to the DMV database, both the car and the driver had been dead for 30 years. Trooper Mitchell had been patrolling Highway 287 through West Texas for 8 years when he encountered the situation that would fundamentally change his understanding of law enforcement and the nature of reality itself. It was a routine Tuesday evening in October, with clear skies and light traffic moving through the sparse countryside between small farming communities. Mitchell was positioned at his usual speed enforcement location, a straight stretch of highway just outside the town limits of Crossroads, where drivers often exceeded the posted speed limit as they traveled between larger cities. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Mitchell's radar detected a vehicle traveling at 78 miles per hour in a 65 mile per hour zone. The car was a well-maintained 1987 Chevrolet Caprice, dark blue with Texas license plates, driven by what appeared to be a middle-aged man who seemed unaware that he had been exceeding the speed limit. Mitchell activated his emergency lights and initiated a routine traffic stop, expecting to complete the citation and move on to his next patrol assignment. The driver pulled over immediately and courteously, parking on the shoulder and turning on his hazard lights in the manner of someone familiar with proper traffic stop procedures. As Mitchell approached the vehicle, he noted that the car appeared to be in excellent condition despite its age, with no visible damage, rust, or signs of neglect. The driver was a man in his 40s with graying hair and the kind of weathered appearance common among rural Texas residents. "Good evening, sir," Mitchell said as he reached the driver's window. "I stopped you for traveling 78 in a 65 mile per hour zone. May I see your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance?" The driver was polite and cooperative, immediately reaching for his wallet and glove compartment to produce the requested documents. "Sorry about that, officer," he said with a slight drawl. "I was coming back from visiting my sister in Amarillo, and I guess I was not paying attention to my speed." Mitchell accepted the documents and returned to his patrol car to run the standard checks through the state database systems. The driver's license belonged to Robert Eugene Hayes. Date of birth, March 15th, 1943, with an address listed in Crossroads, Texas. The vehicle registration showed the same name and address, with current tags and up-to-date inspection stickers. Everything appeared to be in order for a routine speeding citation. However, when Mitchell entered Hayes' information into the DMV database, the results were deeply troubling. According to state records, Robert Eugene Hayes had died in a single-vehicle accident on Highway 287 on October 22, 1993, exactly 30 years ago to the day. The accident report indicated that Hayes had been traveling from Amarillo to Crossroads when he lost control of his 1987 Chevrolet Caprice during a severe thunderstorm, crashing into a concrete culvert and dying instantly from his injuries. Mitchell ran the search again, thinking he might have entered the information incorrectly, but the results were identical. The vehicle registration search produced equally disturbing results. The 1987 Chevrolet Caprice with the license plate number that Mitchell had observed was listed as having been destroyed in the same 1993 accident that killed Robert Hayes. The car had been totaled beyond repair and had been processed through the state's salvage title system. Mitchell sat in his patrol car staring at his computer screen and trying to process information that seemed to contradict the physical evidence in front of him. He could see Robert Hayes sitting in his car 20 feet away, very much alive, and apparently unaware that he had any problems with his documentation. The car appeared solid and real, showing no signs of being a salvage vehicle or having been involved in a serious accident. After several minutes of attempting to reconcile the conflicting information, Mitchell decided to call for backup and assistance from his supervisor. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had been with the Texas Department of Public Safety for over 15 years and had encountered every type of documentation problem and identity fraud case imaginable. "Mitchell to dispatch," he said into his radio. "I need Sergeant Rodriguez to respond to my location for assistance with a traffic stop. I am encountering some unusual circumstances that require supervision." While waiting for his sergeant to arrive, Mitchell approached Hayes' vehicle again, intending to engage in casual conversation while he attempted to understand what was happening. "Mr. Hayes," Mitchell said, "I am having some computer problems with my system tonight. While we wait for them to be resolved, would you mind if I asked you a few questions about your travel plans?" Hayes seemed genuinely happy to chat, explaining that he had been visiting his sister Margaret in Amarillo and was returning to his home in Crossroads, where he worked as a maintenance supervisor for the local school district. He mentioned that the drive usually took about 2 hours, and he tried to make the trip at least once a month to check on Margaret, who had been widowed 3 years earlier. "I have been making this drive for over 20 years, Hayes said conversationally. "Know every mile of this highway like the back of my hand. That is probably why I was not paying attention to my speed tonight." Mitchell noted that Hayes' story was internally consistent and that he seemed to possess detailed knowledge of both Crossroads and the route between there and Amarillo. Nothing about his demeanor or responses suggested deception, mental illness, or any awareness that his existence might be problematic from a legal or administrative standpoint. Sergeant Rodriguez arrived approximately 20 minutes after Mitchell's call for assistance. She was a no-nonsense professional who had earned respect throughout the department for her ability to handle complex situations with competence and discretion. Mitchell briefed her on the situation, showing her the DMV database results and explaining his confusion about how to proceed. Rodriguez ran her own searches through multiple database systems, including the Social Security Administration, the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles, and the National Crime Information Center. Every search produced the same results. Robert Eugene Hayes and his 1987 Chevrolet Caprice had been killed and destroyed in a traffic accident 30 years earlier. "This is definitely unusual," Rodriguez said as she reviewed the computer printouts. "But let us approach it systematically. First, we need to determine whether we are dealing with identity theft, document fraud, or some kind of computer error that has corrupted the database records." Rodriguez decided to interview Hayes directly, using her experience in detecting deception and inconsistencies in suspect statements. She introduced herself and explained that they were experiencing technical difficulties with their computer systems that required additional verification of his identity and vehicle ownership. Hayes was cooperative and patient, providing detailed answers to questions about his personal history, employment, and family relationships. He described growing up in Crossroads, graduating from the local high school in 1961, serving 2 years in the Army, and returning to work for the school district, where he had been employed for over 30 years. He provided specific names, dates, and details that demonstrated extensive knowledge of the community and its history. More puzzling was Hayes's response when Rodriguez asked him about the date. He confidently stated that it was October 22, 1993, and seemed genuinely confused when she suggested that it might be a different year. When she showed him her smartphone and the date display on the patrol car's computer system, Hayes examined them with interest, but maintained that there must be some kind of malfunction with the electronic devices. "I know it is 1993, Hayes said with quiet certainty, because my sister Margaret just finished telling me about how worried she is about President Clinton's healthcare proposals. We talked about it for over an hour tonight." Rodriguez and Mitchell exchanged glances, recognizing that they were encountering something that exceeded their training and experience in routine law enforcement procedures. Hayes appeared to be genuinely convinced that he was living in 1993, driving a car that had been destroyed 3 decades earlier, and returning from a visit with a sister who had presumably died years ago. Rodriguez made the decision to contact the Crossroads Police Department to request assistance in verifying Hayes's current address and employment status. The response she received was even more disturbing than the DMV database discrepancies. According to Chief of Police William Carter, Robert Hayes had indeed been a longtime resident of Crossroads and an employee of the school district until his death in the 1993 traffic accident. His house had been sold to settle his estate, and his position at the school had been filled by a replacement worker. No one named Robert Hayes currently lived in Crossroads, and there had been no contact with any surviving family members since his funeral 30 years earlier. Chief Carter also confirmed that Margaret Hayes, Robert's sister, who lived in Amarillo, had died in 1995, 2 years after her brother's fatal accident. The Amarillo Police Department had no record of anyone by that name currently residing in the city. Rodriguez found herself in the unprecedented situation of conducting a traffic stop on someone who appeared to be dead, driving a vehicle that had been destroyed, and returning from a visit with a deceased family member. Hayes continued to wait patiently in his car, occasionally checking his watch and expressing mild concern about getting home late, but showing no awareness that his existence presented any legal or logical problems. After consulting with her supervisor by phone, Rodriguez made the decision to allow Hayes to continue his journey to Crossroads, with instructions for Mitchell to follow at a distance to observe what would happen when the deceased man attempted to return to his former home. The alternative options of arresting Hayes or impounding his vehicle seemed inappropriate, given that he had committed no crime beyond a minor traffic violation and appeared to be genuinely unaware of his problematic legal status. Mitchell followed Hayes' Chevrolet Caprice along Highway 287 toward Crossroads, maintaining radio contact with Rodriguez and the local police department. Hayes drove carefully and predictably, obeying all traffic laws and proceeding directly toward the address listed on his driver's license. When he reached the outskirts of Crossroads, Hayes turned onto a residential street and parked in the driveway of a modest house that appeared to be well maintained and occupied. Mitchell observed Hayes exit his vehicle, walk to the front door, and use a key to enter the house. Lights came on throughout the building, and Hayes could be seen moving around inside, apparently going through the normal routines of someone arriving home after a long drive. After 30 minutes, the lights went out, suggesting that Hayes had settled in for the night. The next morning, Mitchell returned to the address to follow up on the previous evening's unusual encounter. He found an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and scattered with the foundation remnants of a house that had obviously been demolished years earlier. There was no sign of Hayes, his vehicle, or any indication that anyone had been present at the location during the night. Trooper James Mitchell filed a detailed report about his encounter with Robert Eugene Hayes, but the incident was classified as an administrative anomaly and filed away without further investigation. He continued patrolling Highway 287 for several more years, but he never again encountered Hayes or any other drivers who presented similar documentation discrepancies. However, Mitchell began paying closer attention to traffic patterns and driver behavior in the area around crossroads, particularly on October 22nd each year. He discovered that the anniversary of Hayes' fatal accident seemed to produce an unusual number of minor traffic violations and equipment malfunctions among vehicles traveling the same route Hayes had been taking when he died. More significantly, Mitchell learned from other law enforcement officers in the region that encounters with drivers who appeared to be deceased or driving vehicles that had been destroyed in accidents were not entirely unprecedented in rural West Texas. Several agencies maintained unofficial files of similar incidents, though none had developed procedures for handling situations that seemed to exist outside normal legal and administrative frameworks. The Texas Department of Public Safety continues to patrol Highway 287 through the area around crossroads, maintaining normal traffic enforcement and safety operations, while quietly documenting unusual incidents that cannot be easily explained through conventional law enforcement protocols. Officers are trained to handle encounters with drivers whose documentation may not align with standard database records, always prioritizing public safety while recognizing that some aspects of their work may exceed the boundaries of routine police procedures. Robert Eugene Hayes continues his monthly drives between Crossroads and Amarillo, always careful to observe posted speed limits and maintain his vehicle in good working condition. His documentation is always current and valid according to the standards that applied in 1993, and he remains a courteous and cooperative driver who poses no threat to public safety or traffic enforcement operations. When the regular teacher got sick, substitute Jennifer Hayes took a last-minute assignment in Pine Valley, Idaho. The lesson plan was simple: teach the children how to forget. But Jennifer couldn't understand why they kept practicing on her. Jennifer had been working as a substitute teacher throughout northern Idaho for 3 years when she received the emergency call from Pine Valley Elementary School. The regular third-grade teacher, Mrs. Catherine Morrison, had fallen ill with what the principal described as a sudden onset condition that would require her to be absent for an indefinite period. The school needed someone who could start immediately and commit to staying until a permanent replacement could be found, or Mrs. Morrison recovered. The drive from Coeur d'Alene to Pine Valley took nearly 2 hours through winding mountain roads and dense forests of pine and fir trees that seemed to block out most of the afternoon sunlight. Pine Valley itself was smaller than Jennifer had expected, consisting of perhaps 500 residents scattered through a narrow valley surrounded by steep hills covered with old-growth timber. The elementary school was a modest brick building that appeared to serve all the community's children from kindergarten through 8th grade. Principal Robert Caldwell met Jennifer at the school's main entrance, carrying a thick folder of materials and wearing the kind of harried expression that suggested he had been dealing with crisis management for several days. He was a man in his 50s with thinning hair and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades working with children and their families. "Miss Hayes," he said as he shook her hand with obvious relief, "thank you for coming on such short notice. Mrs. Morrison's absence has created quite a disruption for our students, and we desperately need someone with your experience to help maintain continuity in their education." Principal Caldwell led Jennifer through the school's hallways, pointing out the cafeteria, library, and administrative offices, while explaining the basic routines and expectations for substitute teachers. The building was well maintained and filled with the kind of colorful student artwork and motivational posters that characterized elementary schools everywhere. The third grade class has 18 students, Principal Caldwell explained as they approached Mrs. Morrison's classroom. They are good children, but they have been somewhat unsettled by their teacher's sudden departure. Mrs. Morrison had been working with them on a special curriculum unit that we hope you can continue. Jennifer accepted the folder of lesson plans and classroom materials, expecting to find the usual collection of math worksheets, reading assignments, and social studies activities that comprise typical third-grade education. Instead, she discovered something that seemed unusual and somewhat troubling. The lesson plans were focused entirely on what Mrs. Morrison had labeled memory management exercises. According to the detailed instructions, the students were being taught techniques for selective information processing, cognitive filtering, and adaptive memory modification. The exercises involved having children practice forgetting specific pieces of information while retaining others, with the stated goal of helping them manage information overload and cognitive stress. This curriculum seems quite advanced for third-grade students, Jennifer observed as she reviewed the materials. Are these techniques based on established educational research? Principal Caldwell's expression became slightly defensive. Mrs. Morrison developed these methods based on her graduate work in cognitive psychology. She found that children in Pine Valley were experiencing unusual difficulties with memory retention and emotional regulation, and she believed that teaching them selective memory skills would help them function more effectively in their academic and social environments. Jennifer spent the remainder of the afternoon setting up her temporary workspace and reviewing the classroom materials, trying to understand how she was supposed to implement lesson plans that seemed to have no connection to standard elementary education practices. The memory management exercises included detailed instructions for guided meditation sessions, visualization techniques, and what appeared to be mild forms of hypnosis designed to help children release unnecessary memories and focus on positive experiences. When the students arrived the next morning, Jennifer was struck by their unusual behavior and demeanor. The 18 third graders were remarkably well-behaved and compliant, following instructions without question and participating in classroom activities with a kind of mechanical precision that seemed unnatural for 8- and 9-year-old children. They responded to questions with identical phrasing, completed assignments in synchronized patterns, and seemed to possess no individual personality traits or preferences. More concerning was their response when Jennifer attempted to deviate from Mrs. Morrison's lesson plans by introducing traditional third-grade activities like creative writing and art projects. The students became visibly distressed when asked to express personal opinions or recall specific memories from their own experiences. Several children began crying when Jennifer asked them to write about their favorite family activities or describe what they had done over the weekend. "We are not supposed to remember those things," said a girl named Sarah Fletcher, speaking for the entire class with the authority of someone reciting an established rule. "Mrs. Morrison taught us that some memories make us sad or confused, so we should let them go away." Jennifer realized that the memory management exercises had apparently been successful in teaching the children to suppress or eliminate personal memories and individual experiences. The students seemed to have no clear recollection of their families, their homes, or their activities outside the classroom. They could perform academic tasks competently, but they appeared to have lost the ability to connect their learning to their own lives and experiences. Over the next several days, Jennifer attempted to help the students recover their suppressed memories by engaging them in conversations about their families and encouraging them to share personal stories. The results were deeply disturbing. Many of the children seemed genuinely unable to recall basic information about their parents, siblings, or living situations. Others became extremely agitated when pressed for personal details, displaying symptoms that resembled trauma responses or severe anxiety disorders. When Jennifer expressed her concerns to Principal Caldwell, his reaction was dismissive and somewhat hostile. "Miss Hayes," he said during their meeting in his office, "I appreciate your concern for the students, but I must remind you that you are here as a temporary substitute, not as a curriculum consultant. Mrs. Morrison's methods have been approved by our school board and have produced excellent results in helping our students manage the unique challenges they face living in this community." "What unique challenges?" Jennifer asked. "These are normal children living in a rural mountain community. There is nothing here that would require them to forget their owner, families, and personal experiences." Principal Caldwell's expression hardened. "Miss Hayes, there are aspects of life in Pine Valley that outsiders do not understand. Our children are exposed to situations and information that can be psychologically damaging if not properly managed. Mrs. Morrison's memory management techniques help them focus on their education and their future, rather than dwelling on potentially harmful experiences from their past." Jennifer left the meeting with more questions than answers, but she began to pay closer attention to the community's behavior patterns and social dynamics. What she discovered was a population that seemed to function according to the same principles that were being taught to the children in her classroom. Adult residents of Pine Valley displayed the same kind of emotional flatness and lack of individual personality that characterized her students. Now, more troubling was Jennifer's gradual realization that her own memory was becoming less reliable the longer she remained in Pine Valley. She began having difficulty remembering details about her life before arriving in the community, including information about her family, her education, and her previous teaching experiences. Phone calls to friends and family members became confusing and disorienting, as though she were trying to connect with people who seemed increasingly unfamiliar and distant. When Jennifer attempted to document her observations by keeping a written journal of her experiences in Pine Valley, she discovered that her entries were becoming shorter and less detailed each day. More disturbing was her discovery that she could not remember writing many of the entries, and the handwriting in her journal seemed to change subtly over time, becoming more uniform and less expressive. By the end of her second week in Pine Valley, Jennifer realized that the memory management exercises were being applied to her, as well as to the students. Her lesson planning meetings with Principal Caldwell had apparently included the same kind of guided meditation and visualization techniques that she had been using with the children, and her own memory was being systematically modified to eliminate information that the community deemed inappropriate or disruptive. Jennifer made the decision to leave Pine Valley immediately, but when she attempted to pack her belongings and drive back to Coeur d'Alene, she discovered that she could not remember her home address, her phone number, or the names of anyone she had known before arriving in the mountain community. Her car keys were missing, her credit cards had been canceled, and her cell phone showed no record of any contacts or previous communications. When Jennifer confronted Principal Caldwell about her situation, he seemed genuinely sympathetic, but explained that her memory problems were the natural result of the stress and adjustment difficulties that many newcomers experienced when transitioning to life in Pine Valley. "Miss Hayes," he said with paternal kindness, "you have been working very hard, and it is understandable that you would feel confused and disoriented. The memory management techniques that we use here are designed to help people let go of unnecessary stress and focus on what is really important in their lives. You will find that as you continue to practice these methods, your anxiety and confusion will diminish, and you will begin to feel more at peace with your situation." Jennifer realized that she had become a permanent resident of Pine Valley, unable to leave and gradually losing the ability to remember why she had ever wanted to. The community's systematic use of memory modification techniques had transformed her from a temporary substitute teacher into another compliant member of a population that had learned to forget everything that might cause them distress or motivate them to question their circumstances. Principal Caldwell explained that Mrs. Morrison had not actually been ill, but had simply reached the point where her memory of her previous life had been sufficiently modified to allow her to transition to other duties within the community. Jennifer would continue teaching the third grade class, helping new generations of children learn the valuable skill of selective forgetting that was essential to maintaining the peaceful and harmonious atmosphere that made Pine Valley such a desirable place to live. Jennifer Hayes currently serves as the third grade teacher at Pine Valley Elementary School, having accepted a permanent position after demonstrating her competence in implementing the school's specialized curriculum. Her memory management exercises continue to help students develop the cognitive skills they need to function effectively in their mountain community, where traditional approaches to education and personal development have been found to be less effective than innovative methods designed specifically for the unique needs of rural Idaho children. The students in her class are well-behaved, academically successful, and emotionally stable, having learned to focus on positive experiences while releasing memories that might cause unnecessary stress or anxiety. Their families are grateful for the school's progressive approach to childhood education, and many parents have requested similar memory management services for themselves and their older children. Jennifer finds great satisfaction in her work, though she sometimes experiences vague feelings of nostalgia for experiences she cannot quite remember. These feelings pass quickly when she practices the meditation and visualization techniques that have become an integral part of her daily routine, and she has learned to appreciate the peace and contentment that come from living without the burden of unnecessary memories. Pine Valley Elementary School continues to attract educational professionals who are interested in innovative approaches to childhood development, always offering competitive salaries and comprehensive benefits to qualified teachers who are willing to commit to long-term service in the community. The school's success in producing well-adjusted, academically successful students has earned recognition from state education officials, though the specific methods used to achieve these results are considered proprietary information that is not shared outside the Pine Valley community. Principal Robert Caldwell maintains active relationships with teacher training programs throughout the region, regularly recruiting promising educators who possess the flexibility and open-mindedness necessary to implement progressive memory management techniques. Every teacher who joins the Pine Valley faculty eventually discovers that effective education requires helping students learn not only what to remember, but also what to forget, and why both skills are essential for achieving lasting happiness and social stability. Thomas Cole was hired to settle a property dispute in Blackwater Creek, Mississippi. But when he measured the town limits, he kept getting the same impossible result. The town was bigger on the inside than the outside. Thomas had been working as a licensed land surveyor throughout the Southeast for over 20 years when he received the call from the law firm of Henderson, Blackwell & Associates in Jackson. They needed an independent surveyor to resolve a boundary dispute in Blackwater Creek, a small community in rural Mississippi where conflicting property claims had escalated into litigation between several landowners and the municipal government. The case involved discrepancies between historical surveys dating back to the 1920s and more recent assessments that showed significant variations in lot sizes and property boundaries. The attorney handling the case, Margaret Henderson, explained that Blackwater Creek had been experiencing unusual difficulties with property documentation for several years. Real estate transactions had been complicated by surveys that produced inconsistent results, and several families were involved in disputes over land that appeared to change size depending on who conducted the measurements. The situation had become serious enough to threaten the community's ability to conduct normal business and municipal planning. "We need someone with your reputation for precision and objectivity," Henderson explained during their phone conversation. the local surveyors have been unable to provide consistent results, and we suspect there may have been errors in the original township surveys that established the community's boundaries in the 1800s. Thomas accepted the assignment and drove the 4 hours from his office in Birmingham to Blackwater Creek on a clear October morning. The route took him through the rolling hills and pine forests of eastern Mississippi, past small farming communities and timber operations that represented the traditional economic foundation of the region. Blackwater Creek itself was located in a valley between two low ridges, accessible by a single 2-lane highway that seemed to wind longer than the map indicated it should. The community was larger than Thomas had expected, with a population that appeared to number in the thousands rather than the few hundred residents that Henderson had described. The downtown area featured a substantial business district with shops, restaurants, and professional offices that suggested a thriving local economy. Residential neighborhoods extended in all directions from the center of town, with well-maintained houses and tree-lined streets that indicated prosperity and civic pride. Thomas met with Mayor William Drayfield at the town hall, an impressive brick building that dominated the central square. Mayor Drayfield was a distinguished man in his 60s who seemed genuinely frustrated by the ongoing property disputes and eager to find a resolution that would allow normal municipal operations to resume. "Mr. Cole," the mayor said as he spread a collection of maps and surveys across his desk, "we have been dealing with these boundary problems for over 3 years now. Every time someone tries to survey a lot or establish property lines, the measurements come out different from the previous survey. It is making it impossible to issue building permits, conduct real estate transactions, or even collect property taxes accurately." Thomas examined the various surveys and maps that had been produced by different professionals over the past several years. What he found was deeply puzzling. The measurements were internally consistent within each individual survey, and the work appeared to have been conducted competently using proper techniques and equipment. However, the results varied dramatically from one survey to another, with the same pieces of property showing different sizes, shapes, and boundary locations depending on when and by whom they had been measured. Most troubling was the fact that the total area of the community seemed to change depending on the scope of the survey being conducted. When surveyors measured individual lots, the combined area of all private properties within the town limits was significantly larger than the total area of the municipality as measured from its outer boundaries. The mathematical impossibility of this situation had led several surveying firms to withdraw from projects in Blackwater Creek, unwilling to stake their professional reputations on results that defied basic principles of geometry and land measurement. Thomas spent his first day establishing a comprehensive baseline survey of the town's outer boundaries, using GPS equipment and traditional surveying instruments to create the most accurate possible measurement of Blackwater Creek's total area. Working systematically around the perimeter of the community, he documented every corner, boundary marker, and geographical feature that defined the municipal limits. The results of his perimeter survey indicated that Blackwater Creek occupied approximately 8.2 square miles of land area, which was consistent with the legal descriptions in the town's incorporation documents and the county records that established its municipal boundaries. Thomas was satisfied with the accuracy of his measurements and confident that he had established a reliable baseline for resolving the property disputes. However, when Thomas began conducting detailed surveys of individual properties within the town limits, he immediately encountered the same problems that had frustrated previous surveyors. The measurements he obtained for private lots, commercial properties, and public spaces consistently added up to a total area that was significantly larger than the 8.2 square miles he had measured for the entire community. After 3 days of careful work, Thomas calculated that the combined area of all properties within Blackwater Creek totaled approximately 23.7 square miles, nearly 3 times larger than the space that the town actually occupied, according to his perimeter measurements. He checked and rechecked his calculations, verified his equipment calibration, and repeated key measurements multiple times, but the results remained consistent and inexplicable. Thomas requested a meeting with Mayor Drayfield to discuss his preliminary findings and to explore possible explanations for the discrepancies he had discovered. "Mayor Drayfield," Thomas said as he laid out his survey maps and calculations, "I need to ask you some direct questions about the history of this community and any unusual circumstances that might affect land measurement and property boundaries." The mayor studied Thomas's maps for several minutes before responding. "Mr. Cole, Blackwater Creek has always been a special place. The original settlers in the 1840s chose this location because they found it had certain properties that made it particularly suitable for establishing a permanent community." "What kind of properties?" Thomas asked. Mayor Drayfield seemed to choose his words carefully. "The land here has a way of providing exactly what the community needs when it needs it. As our population has grown and our requirements have expanded, the available space has somehow adapted to accommodate our development." Thomas stared at the mayor, unsure how to respond to an explanation that seemed to suggest that land area could expand to meet demand. "Are you telling me that the physical size of Blackwater Creek changes based on the community's needs?" "I'm telling you that this valley has sustained our community for over 180 years, Mayor Drayfield replied, "and it has never failed to provide adequate space for everyone who belongs here. The exact measurements may vary depending on external factors, but the practical reality is that there is always enough room for the people and activities that are meant to be here." Thomas spent the next several days conducting additional surveys and measurements, trying to understand the mechanism by which Blackwater Creek seemed to contain more space than should be physically possible. What he discovered was that the apparent expansion occurred in subtle ways that were difficult to detect without systematic measurement. Roads and streets within the community were consistently longer than their counterparts outside the town limits, though the difference was only noticeable when measured precisely. Property lots were deeper and wider than they appeared to be, with additional area that became apparent only when surveyed carefully. Public spaces, parking areas, and commercial districts occupied more ground than visual inspection suggested they should require. The effect was not dramatic enough to be obvious to casual observation, but it was systematic and pervasive throughout the community. Blackwater Creek seemed to exist in a state of spatial expansion that allowed it to accommodate development and population growth without the usual constraints of limited land area. Thomas also discovered that the spatial anomalies were most pronounced in areas where the community had experienced recent growth or development. New residential subdivisions occupied significantly more land than their legal descriptions indicated, and commercial areas had expanded to provide more space for businesses and customers than should have been possible within the original property boundaries. When Thomas attempted to document his findings and prepare a formal report for the law firm that had hired him, he found that his survey data was difficult to present in a coherent manner. The measurements were accurate and verifiable, but they described a physical reality that contradicted basic principles of geography and land use planning. Margaret Henderson seemed unsurprised when Thomas called to discuss his preliminary findings and the challenges he was facing in preparing his report. "Mr. Cole," she said, "we have been aware that Blackwater Creek presents some unusual surveying challenges. The important thing is to provide measurements that allow property transactions and municipal planning to proceed normally. We are not particularly concerned with theoretical questions about spatial geometry, as long as the practical needs of the community can be met." Thomas realized that he was being asked to provide survey results that would facilitate normal legal and administrative processes, regardless of the underlying impossibilities that his measurements had revealed. The law firm and the municipal government were apparently willing to accept spatial anomalies as long as they did not interfere with practical community functions. Over the next week, Thomas prepared a survey report that documented the boundaries and areas of individual properties within Blackwater Creek, using measurements that were internally consistent and professionally accurate. He made no attempt to reconcile his findings with the physical impossibility of the community containing more space than should exist within its outer boundaries. The property disputes were resolved based on Thomas's survey, and normal real estate transactions resumed in Blackwater Creek. Property owners accepted boundary determinations that provided them with the amount of land they needed for their intended uses, and the municipal government was able to resume issuing permits and collecting taxes based on survey data that supported administrative requirements. Thomas Cole completed his work in Blackwater Creek and returned to Birmingham with a surveying experience that challenged his understanding of the physical world, but which had ultimately produced practical results that met his client's needs. He filed his equipment calibration reports, archived his field notes, and invoiced for services, rendered without mentioning the spatial anomalies that had made his measurements possible. However, Thomas began paying closer attention to reports of surveying difficulties in other small rural communities throughout the Southeast. He discovered that Blackwater Creek was not unique in presenting measurement challenges that seemed to defy conventional principles of land surveying, and he gradually accepted referrals for similar projects in communities where space seemed to expand to meet development needs. Thomas now specializes in surveying work for municipalities and property owners who require documentation that supports practical land use decisions rather than theoretical consistency with standard geometric principles. His surveys are accurate, reliable, and accepted by courts and administrative agencies throughout the region, though the underlying spatial mechanics that make his work possible remain beyond conventional professional explanation. Blackwater Creek continues to grow and prosper, accommodating new residents and businesses within a land area that expands as needed to support community development. Property values remain stable, real estate transactions proceed smoothly, and municipal planning operates according to normal administrative procedures. Though the community's total area continues to be larger on the inside than measurements of its outer boundaries would suggest should be possible, the spatial anomalies that allow this expansion are generally ignored by residents and visitors, who find that the community provides exactly the amount of space they need for their activities and purposes. Nobody questions why parking lots are always adequate, why residential lots provide enough room for desired improvements, or why commercial districts can accommodate new businesses without appearing crowded or overdeveloped. Land surveying in Blackwater Creek continues to produce results that support normal property ownership and municipal governance, with measurements that are accurate and consistent within the community while remaining impossible to reconcile with external geographic constraints. The practical needs of the residents are met, and the theoretical implications of living in a space that defies conventional spatial limitations are considered less important than maintaining the quality of life that has attracted families to the community for over 180 years.